But just by way of a little bit of review, last week we talked about in the book of Revelation, there's two viewpoints that are mentioned. And the first, I've got to get I have my picture floating around here, it's in my way. It starts off with the heavenly viewpoint. Chapters 1 through 11, it starts off with the vision of Jesus. And then in chapters 4 and 5, there's the vision of the throne scene, and everything is from God's perspective, or from the heavenly perspective, that happens in chapters 1 through 11. And really, 1 through 11 is everything that the book of Revelation is talking about, almost. And that's chapters 1 through 11, and it's centered around the throne room. And then the rest of the book, chapters 12 through chapter 22, really, are from an earthly viewpoint, from the standpoint of Rome and Satan, and their part in God's plans, the part that they played in the unfolding of the things that happened in chapters 1 through 11. And so we have the same story repeated in a second cycle of visions, emphasizing Satan's activity in Jerusalem's fall. And so we began last week in chapter 12, and chapter 12 deals with a woman and a dragon, and we got several verses in, so I'm just going to briefly read through them so we can get ourselves in the same position that we were in when we closed last week. And in verse 1, it says, "Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars." And this woman that we talked about last week really could be summed up in the people, the children of the nation of Israel, I guess you'd say. It's really the lineage from all the way back from Eve, who God said through her seed, Satan's head would be bruised, and coming all the way through Abraham and the beginning of the nation of Israel, and God adopting this one family, this one nation, in order to nurse them through, and to bring the Messiah into the world that would save the entire world. And so that's who the woman is we're talking about. In Malachi, it talks about the people, the nation of Israel, being God's wife, and the entire book of Hosea is about an unfaithful woman, which represents the nation of Israel, how they'd been unfaithful to God, like a wife being unfaithful to her husband. And so it's this woman, the nation of Israel, that brought forth what we're going to see. And she had a garland, that's the victory crown of 12 stars. The stars may represent the 12 tribes of Israel. That was her crown of victory, the nation of Israel. And then it says, verse 2, "Being with child, she cried out in labor and pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on its heads. And his tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth." And we talked about last week that this dragon, we're going to see later on, I think it's verse 9, it specifically says that this dragon is the devil and Satan. And so Satan is trying to kill this child that's about to be born. And obviously we understand that this child is Jesus that was going to be born. And let me just get past all these that we talked about last time. Anyway, and then it continues, "Then the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born." That was the dragon Satan was trying to kill this child as soon as he was born. Of course, obviously that represents Satan's influence on Herod. He was the one that was trying to kill Jesus, and they fled to Egypt, and the death threat was thwarted. And so Jesus survived that scare. And it says, verse 5, she bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. Now, we're going to see that is talking about the ascension of Jesus. We're going to read some passages in a little while in Psalms and Acts and Daniel that talk about this event and show that these prophecies in Psalms and Daniel were messianic and talking about Jesus, and the fulfillments are found here in the book of Revelation. And then it says, after the child was caught up to God and his throne, the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God that they should feed her there for 1,260 days. And this woman that fled into the wilderness were the righteous people, the people of God who had given birth to this child, which was Jesus. They ended up fleeing into Perea on the command of Jesus, or on the suggestion, I guess you would say. Well, he even said, do it. When you see the armies surrounding Jerusalem, get out and go and get away from there. And they did it. When they saw the abomination of desolation, or the armies of Rome beginning to surround the city of Jerusalem, they fled to Perea, which is on the other side of the Jordan River, and just followed Jesus's instructions that he gave in Matthew 24. And we've seen the 1,260 days before, and we'll see it again. That is, if you add up the days, that's exactly 3.5 years. Same thing as time times and half a time. The same thing as 42 months. And it's all talking about the same 3.5 year time period from the time that the Romans first landed at Caesarea. Vespasian and Titus landed on the coast of Israel at Caesarea. They came from the sea. That'll be important in a little bit as well in the next chapter. They came from the sea and began conquering Israel. It took them 3.5 years to conquer Israel. And during the last 5 months was the siege of the city of Jerusalem before it was destroyed, and not one stone was left standing on the temple. And so, like I said last week, the time span covered by these last chapters from chapter 12 on is more broad. Chapters 1 through 11 only talk about the time of the war, the time of the fighting and the ultimate destruction of Jerusalem. Now we see here that we've gone back to the birth of Christ, and moving up from there. And so it's a little bit broader, expansive time. And in just these few verses, we have his birth, his ascension, he's caught up to God, and then the woman fleeing into the wilderness. That happened during the last a little bit before the last 5 months of the siege, or the destruction of the nation of Israel. And so you have quite a bit longer time period there that's covered. But anyway, these faithful that fled, it was for the 3.5 years. Anyway, there's some things I want to point out here. First of all, it has to do with Satan. He had a lot of influence on Herod, but Satan failed to kill Jesus after his birth. Herod was out to do it. He was ready to kill him if he could have found him, and that plan was altered by God, who had Jesus taken down into Egypt during the time until Herod died. And so then later on, Jesus was killed by Satan's influenced the children of Israel and or the Romans and the Jewish folks, the leadership. Finally, they got so fed up with Jesus's teaching, and he was baiting them all along. He knew he had to be killed, but he did it in his own time, not in their time. They killed Jesus. That was Satan's idea. He wanted him to be killed, but apparently what he wasn't thinking of was that was the very event that sealed the forgiveness of sins. Jesus conquered sin. We'll talk about that in a little bit when he died on the cross. And then the child was caught up to God, ascended into heaven. He was resurrected, ascended in heaven, thereby conquering death as well. I guess I'm getting a little ahead of myself there. When Satan killed Jesus, it only brought failure again, because now people have forgiveness of sin because of the killing of Jesus. And then Jesus raised from the dead, ascended back to God. Now he's reigning on his throne. So once again, Satan is defeated. And then later on in verse 17, we're going to see that he went after the rest of her offspring, of this woman, all the people that were born out of this event that happened with the woman bearing this child. The rest of the people, these are the Christians that got sent away, or that fled. Satan failed to kill them as well. And so Satan has a huge failure time after time after time. And that's what a lot of this is dealing with. Now, I said earlier that we're going to look at Psalms chapter 2, verses 1 through 9. There are these passages. And so now we're going to look at them and just see that the wrath that God brought on the children of Israel, on the nation of Israel, was predicted way ahead of time. In Psalm 2, verses 1 through 9, it says, "Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed." Now, we all know who the anointed of the Lord is, right? It's Jesus. So here, now that puts a time on what this prophecy is talking about. It's the nations and the people. The people always refer to the Israelites, the children of Israel. So the nations are the Gentiles, the people are the Jews. They both rage and plot a vain thing. They set themselves, the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. They're trying to get rid of God's anointed. And they're saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cord from us. We don't like the teaching that this anointed one supposedly is teaching, so let's get rid of it. Let's cast it away from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. This is the psalmist saying, the one that sits in the heaven, God, the God of heaven, shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure. Now, that distressing in his deep displeasure and speaking to them in his wrath sound anything like what we've been studying about so far in the whole book of Revelation? All the terrible things that were predicted and that were coming to pass, all the stuff that we read in Josephus, that's predicted 1,000 years ahead of time in Psalm chapter 2. Verse 6 says, "Yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. He specifically mentions it in the first verses of chapter 12 in Revelation that we just read, that he would break them with a rod of iron. It's talking about Jesus. That's who we're talking about. And he says God's wrath and displeasure would come upon them, and he would give them the nations for his inheritance, and he would reign. Isn't that exactly how chapter 11 ends? He took the power and he reigned. Exactly what Psalm was talking about. It was talking about the resurrection, and we'll see that from the book of Acts, where this very phrase is applied to Jesus and his resurrection. So here we are in Acts chapter 4, starting with verse 23 or 24. So they, when they heard that, they raised their voice to God with one accord and said, Lord, you are God, who made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, who by the mouth of your servant David, now he's bringing in something that David said in the Psalms, and has said, why did the nations rage? He's quoting right now from Psalm 2. Why did the nations rage and the people plot vain things? The kings of the earth took their stand, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his Christ, against his anointed one. That's what the word Christ means, is anointed. So it's the same thing there. For truly, your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the Gentiles and the people, the two kings, or the two rulers, Herod and Pontius Pilate, the nations, the Gentiles, and the people of Israel were gathered together to do whatever your hand and your purpose determined before to be done. And so this was by God's pre-planning that all this happened. He didn't make Pontius Pilate and Herod do this, but he controlled the events so that, knowing their character, that they would do the very things that they ended up doing. And then in Daniel, he says, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. Sounds exactly like what we see in what Jesus said was going to happen in Matthew 24. He would come with the clouds. He came to the Ancient of Days. Now, instead of Jesus coming down to earth, now it says he came to the Ancient of Days, who is God. So this is talking about the ascension, when Jesus came from earth, came to God, and they brought him near before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed. And so here again in Daniel, Jesus ascends into heaven, and then he's given this dominion and authority. And this dominion will not pass away. It's not going to be done. He's going to continue to rule his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed. Keep in mind, Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. So we're not talking about Jesus ruling physically here on this earth. Not going to happen. I'm talking about it in a physical kingdom. Jesus does rule now. He is King of Kings, Lord of Lords. He's ruling over the kingdom, which is a spiritual kingdom, and it covers the entire world. Anybody, anywhere in the world can be part of this kingdom. And then I just threw in Isaiah 2 here. It says, it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. This mountain of the Lord's house. We know from 1 Timothy 3, the house of the Lord is the church. And in the last days, this church would be established and all nations would flow unto it. That's exactly what happened. Paul says in Colossians that the gospel had been preached to the entire creation, and all nations were flowing into the kingdom of God. Okay, so now let's continue on in chapter 12. In verse 7, it says, "And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon." Remember, the dragon is Satan. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So Satan and his angels being in heaven, there was no place for them anymore. We don't need you around here. You're messing things up. So the great dragon, that is Satan, was cast out. That serpent of old, called the devil and Satan. So if there's any question about anybody's mind who the dragon is in the book of Revelation, who is it? It's the devil, or Satan. So when you see the dragon, it's the devil, and it's Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, "Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused before our God day and night, has been cast down." Just think about it. Remember reading the book of Job and how Satan's there saying, "Well, yeah, well, you're blessing him so much. No wonder he's following after. He doesn't have good character. Take away his blessings, and you'll see that he doesn't care about you. He doesn't love you, or whatever." So he's accusing, making accusations about Job to God, and now God says, "I'm done with that. You're going to be cast down." And so he has been cast down, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. So how is Satan overcome? How is he defeated? But by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. That's why we're doing a series of lessons in the preaching part of our worship service on the life of Christ, looking about the word of God's and Jesus' testimony. These people did not love their lives even to the death. Who are these people? They're the ones under the altar saying, "How long, O Master? We gave our lives for you. When are you going to avenge us?" That was back in chapter 5. Now that all has happened. The vengeance has come by the end of chapter 11. Now it's reiterated, but Satan has been cast down. Therefore, verse 12, "Rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows he has a short time." So this whole section we just read mentions many times Satan has been cast down to the earth. And now it says he only has a short time, and he's really raging because of that. So the question is, when did this happen? He's still here. He's around. He hasn't been destroyed, but we'll talk about some stuff as we go on when we talk about this great dragon being cast down. So the next thing we've got to talk about is, when did that happen? Is that still waiting to be happen in the future, or did it already happen? And we need to prove that.
He is present in the garden when it's deep. That means he was cast down to the earth before that.
Well, it doesn't say he stayed there. And the reason I say that is because I'm going to read a passage in just a second here. When the 70 returned, remember we studied this a couple of months ago in the Sunday morning lessons. Jesus sent the 70 out and gave them the power to cast out demons. And when they came back, what did they say? Man, even the demons listen to us. the demon, we're able to cast out demons. And what did Jesus say when he heard them talking about that? He said, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Satan's power was the beginning of the end for Satan, is what it was. Jesus, and we're talking about a time span of years here, not, remember I said that the time spans are stretched out a little bit in this last part. So before Jesus ever died on the cross, he said, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. And what was the reason he could see that? His disciples were casting out demons. What had Jesus said about what it means to be able to cast out demons? He said, but if I cast out demons by the Spirit of God, surely the kingdom of God has come upon you. Or how can one enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man, and then he will plunder his house? By Jesus being able to cast out demons, that showed that he had already bound the strong man and was able to do whatever he wanted. He was able to cast out those demons who were under the devil's control. And Jesus was binding the strong man to be able to do it. And the fact that his disciples could do it, those 70 could do it, and were so amazed that they could do it, meant that he was binding Satan there. And that's what it means when he says, I saw Satan I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. He fell from heaven, fell from that position that he had there, and his power is going away. And there's no more accusing the saints in the presence of God. He can't do that anymore. He can't accuse you and me because he's not before God anymore. He can't accuse us anymore. He will be overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the power of his testimony. When we are baptized into Christ, come in contact with the blood of the Lamb, Satan has no more power over you anymore, unless you let him. Exactly. He cannot touch you. You don't have to fear Satan anymore because he has been bound. He's on a chain. And anything outside that chain is the presence of God, the safe in the arms of Jesus, so to speak. If you want to wander inside that chain, then you're at your own risk. But you stay in the realm that you belong in, associated with Jesus and associated with God. Satan has no power over you. We need to have that confidence. Satan has no power when we are connected up with the blood of the Lamb and listen to the power of his testimony. Now, the last thing it said there was, but he has a little time. He's angry. He's going about in wrath because he knows he's only got a little bit of time. He's going to be powerless as this kingdom is fully formed. We've been talking about how the kingdom was established in Acts 2, the first sermon that Peter opened the door with the keys of the kingdom, preached the first gospel sermon. The first 3,000 people were baptized into Christ. And then they were added as you go through the book of Acts. The kingdom was being built. But this kingdom and total rule was not completely finished, was not fully formed until the nation of Israel was destroyed, and every trace of that old worship, the old system of things that Hebrews says was nigh unto vanishing away, had vanished. And then what's left is just the kingdom of God in relation to God's relationship to people. The nation of Israel was no more. And now the kingdom is the church with its headquarters in heaven, the high priest in heaven, the temple, the tabernacle in heaven, the holy place in heaven, the Ark of the Covenant in heaven. And we now, as priests and kings, we have access to God through our high priest, who is Jesus. And it's a spiritual kingdom. The whole thing is spiritual. God has taken over. Now, I just wanted to point out that at the crucifixion, this is in connection with the dragon being cast to the earth. At the crucifixion, Jesus conquers the sting of death, which is sin. 1 Corinthians 15:54 says, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O Hades, that's the realm of the dead, where is your victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Jesus did away with the law at the cross. The sting of death was sin, and the strength of sin is the law. That's what gave sin. That's what told you when you were sinning was the law. But now Jesus did away with the law at the cross. In Colossians 2:13, he says, and you did he make alive together with him, having forgiven us of all of our trespasses, having blotted out the handwriting written in ordinances, and he has taken it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. Having despoiled the principalities and the powers, he made show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. And so he, on the cross, he blotted out that handwriting which was written in ordinances, that is the law. And so he overcame, on the cross, he overcame the sting of death, which is sin, overcame sin by giving us forgiveness of sin, and he did away with the handwriting written in ordinances, nailing it to the cross. And then at the resurrection, Jesus conquered death itself. He raised himself. But now Christ is risen from the dead and has become the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. Everybody who has died, Jesus has already raised up. He's the first fruits. All of us can follow in his steps, for he must reign until he put all enemies under his feet. Last enemy that will be destroyed is death. And so even though Jesus conquered death for himself, the complete conquering was going to happen at the final resurrection of all of us. We will be raised just like Jesus was. And so there is no victory in death anymore. And Satan has great wrath because he knows he has a short time. Now, his wrath was shown in multiple ways, but what we've been talking about in the book of Revelation is, remember the things that we read in Josephus, all the horrible things that the Jews were doing to each other? You think that was following the instructions of the Lord? No, that was following after Satan. His wrath was shown by him stirring up all these people to do these horrible things to each other. And then also he stirred up the Romans to totally destroy the nation of Israel. Even the things we read in Josephus, how Titus didn't want to do as much destruction, but these Jews made him so angry that when they did come through, he gave the soldiers just plow them under, just totally wipe them out. And so this was all Satan's influence. So all the things that we studied about in chapters 1 through 11, the warring that was happening, that Satan was behind all of that. He had just a little time. He knew that he was cast down to the earth and he just had a short time. Now, when we say a short time, from the time that happened, just before Jesus's death, maybe a year or so before Jesus's death, so say 29 AD, up to 70 AD, you're talking 41, 42 years. But compared to thousands of years that Satan had been influencing people, 42 years is a pretty short time, right? And he knew his end was coming. But when all of this was said and done, when the nation was destroyed and Jesus was reigning from the right hand of God, Satan is a weak little puppy, cannot do anything because his head has been bruised. And so the fully formed kingdom, in the fully formed kingdom, Satan has no power. I don't think that's been emphasized enough. We run around in fear of Satan all the time. We don't need to be afraid. What we need to do is respect his power if we get in his realm, but you don't have to be afraid of him any more than if there was a lion chained to the wall here and had a 20-foot leash on him. As long as Keith stays back there, he doesn't have to be afraid. Lion can roar and whatever. Sue might have to be a little worried. I don't know how far 20 feet is, but that's getting pretty close. But as long as you stay out of the length that he has, you don't have to worry. Don't have to be afraid. You just have to be prepared and stop tempting it. Don't try to see how close you can get without getting bit. You see these videos all the time of kids coming up to in a zoo, coming up and holding the bars and looking in, and then the monkey grabs them by the shirt and tries to pull them in and everything. Maybe the monkey's not trying to hurt them, but not realizing it, he might hurt them. You don't get that close. Yeah, you have to be satisfied staying as far away as you can from Satan's influence. Okay, well, I guess that's a really good place to quit. It's time for us to stop right now. I think that clock is a little bit fast, but let me just read this just by way of looking ahead a little bit. He continues in Revelation chapter 12 in verse 13. It says, "Now when the dragon, that is Satan, when he saw that he had been cast down to earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child." And so the faithful people, like you said before, this woman is the faithful people of God. He's persecuting them, but the persecution is not going to be successful. We'll see that next time. Does anybody have any question or any comment that you would like to make?
Heaven must have been transition from earth to heaven. So Satan fall out of heaven.
I'm not getting what.
Satan cast out there. Jesus said, so Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So I'm saying is that if he doesn't in some form return to heaven, for him to fall out like.
Yeah. I mean, none of that is explained any more than when an angel comes down. How did that happen? When did they go back and all that? We're not told any of that stuff. But I did want to say that Satan's wrath. You look back past New Testament times, do you see demons? No. You look past AD 70 or AD 90, whenever the last person that had his hands laid on by an apostle, when that last person died, do you see any more casting out demons? Do you see any more demons? No, people today say there are, but I say they're not. The book of Zechariah says that in this messianic time, the demons would depart the earth. Satan's wrath was shown in the demons and the things that he was causing people to do, the fighting and the infighting, and that was his last ditch effort to try to gain the victory, and he fell flat on his face when it was all said and done. Barb, did you have?
in heaven. You know, I just figured he was not in heaven when he went to eat.
Well, I mean, you have the same thing with Jesus when Satan came and tempted him. It's hard for us to really understand the spiritual world in the full sense, but Satan was cast permanently out of heaven, like when we're talking about there, his influence was totally, and part of it, I wasn't going to bring it up, but part of it in some of the commentaries that I read, the casting out of heaven is more about him losing his power and influence than it is about his physical presence wherever it is. But I don't really have time to talk more into it. But any other things? If not, then we'll get back together in about 15 minutes, I guess, for our worship service. Thank you guys for your attention. Lesson for the day, and I'm going to read the scripture reading, which is from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 17 and 18. Paul says, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal." During our Revelation class, I was making the point that the kingdom of God is unseen. It's not of this world. You look around, anything you see, that's not the kingdom. The kingdom of God is within us, and it's a spiritual thing. And so our eyes should not be on the things that we see, but on the things which we can't see, looking with spiritual eyes towards heaven, keeping our eyes on God and on his son Jesus. Last week, in looking at the life of Christ, we looked at three parables. I'm going to talk about them, but we looked at the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son, showing God's love for the lost. And today, Jesus moves on to another parable. It's actually the first of some parables on the subject of stewardship. And we're just going to look at one today. That's from Luke chapter 16, and that is the parable of the shrewd steward. Now, I chose this title. Normally, you hear it, the parable of the unfaithful or the unjust or the unrighteous steward. But I think he gets a kind of a bum rap, as you'll see as we go through, by calling him unjust or unrighteous. Let's just look at what Jesus says in Luke 16, verse 1. He also said to his disciples, "There was a certain rich man who had a steward." Well, generally speaking, it's the rich people that are able to afford to have a steward, have somebody that minds their business. That's what a steward does, is takes care of the business end of things for someone or some company or whatever. We don't usually call them stewards anymore, but we call them a manager or something like that. Anyway, this rich guy has a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. Now, wasting, if you have money, you don't want somebody that's taking care of your money wasting it. Doesn't say he was stealing it, which would make him unrighteous or unjust, but he was wasting it, which is not a good look for a steward. And this man didn't like it, so he called him to him and said, "What's this I hear about you? Give an account for yourself or for your stewardship, or you can no longer be a steward." And so he hears this accusation, apparently from a reliable source, because he believes it. And he calls the guy up and says, "All right, I need you to give an account for what's going on. And I need to see where all the accounts lie right now, because you can't be steward anymore. You've been wasting my stuff." And so this guy's in trouble. He's losing his livelihood. And as you can see from this picture, depicts him with a downcast face, like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. Now what am I going to do for a living? Well, then the steward said within himself, "What shall I do? For my master's taking the stewardship away from me." I don't know if all of you, but I have lost jobs in the past and think, oh, what am I going to do now? Got to take care of my family and myself. Anyway, he says the stewardship's going to be taken away from me. He says, "I cannot dig. I'm no good at digging, and I'm ashamed to beg." So he's thinking within himself, well, I can't do manual labor, and I can't, I hate to sit on a street corner and beg for money. So he keeps thinking, and he says, "I have resolved what to do, that when I'm put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses." So he gets this plan. Okay, well, if I can't be this guy's steward anymore, maybe I can be invited into other people's homes, either for a job or just for a time till I can get my feet on the ground or whatever. And so he's thinking that's what I'm going to do. And so what he does is he's losing his stewardship. He's going to have to give an account. He's supposed to be getting the books ready to let the master of the house know what's going on. So he calls every one of his master's debtors to him. And he said to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" And he said, 100 measures of oil. So he said to him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly and write 50. So he's telling him, "All right, I'm just going to give you a discount of 50%. You can write off half of it, and that's all you owe now." You think this guy would be happy? Yeah, you'd be happy if somebody forgave half of your debt. If you owe $100,000 left on your house to pay off, and somebody says, "Okay, now you only owe 50,000." I'd love that. I'd love to hear that. Anyway, that would be my friend for life if somebody did that for me. So anyway, that's what he does to the first. Then he said to another, "And how much do you owe?" So he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, "Take your bill and write 80. Now, why he told this guy 80% and that he still had to pay compared to 50%, I don't know, but 20% is better than nothing. I'd be happy if somebody gave me 20% off of a large loan that I had against somebody. So he's making friends. So what happens? So the master commended the unjust steward because he dealt shrewdly. Okay, if you were the master, would you commend him? You just cost him quite a bit of oil and goods, but he commends him. He says, "Oh, well, I got to hand it to you. You used your brains. You were still steward, and you You had it in your control. You had the books. Maybe it was my mistake. I didn't take the book away from you yesterday. But nonetheless, he said, okay, I got to hand it to you. And then Jesus says, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. Now, shrewdness usually has a kind of a nefarious idea towards it, like not exactly up and on the up and up. And this really wasn't exactly on the up and up. And I think that's why he might be called unjust, because he was dealing with somebody else's money and using it for his own gain instead of for the gain of the other person. And so, but yet he's commended by the master. Yeah, you were pretty smart about what you were doing. And then what's really weird is what Jesus says next. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon. Now, he's talking to his disciples now, not to the Pharisees. The other parables were to the Pharisees. Now, this one is to the disciples, and he says, make friends for yourselves of unrighteous mammon. Did Jesus commend dishonesty? Wasn't that what the guy was just doing? He's called a dishonest or unjust. Is that what Jesus is doing, commanding that? Well, what we need to do is understand what unrighteous mammon is. So what is unrighteous mammon in this context? Well, he's talking about the wealth and the riches of this unrighteous world. Love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. We have the phrase filthy lucre. Just money sometimes has a bad connotation. The worldly wealth, every dollar that you touch, well, maybe not every dollar that you touch, but you can't go through life without touching a few dollars that has been used for nefarious purposes. As the money circulates, what he's talking about is using the wealth of this world. It's the same money that's often used for unrighteous purposes, so that when it fails, when does money fail you? If you got $1 million in the bank, when is the only time it can fail you? You can't take it with you. When you die, you can't take it with you. So when you die, then they may receive you into an everlasting home. The everlasting home, obviously, is heaven. So Jesus is saying, use the things of this world to make plans for yourself for your future in heaven. If you use your worldly wealth to help and make friends, you may see them again in heaven. And so he's not saying use nefarious purposes or whatever, but use the money in this world that's used for unrighteous purposes. Use that in a wise way to lay up treasures for yourself in heaven. We'll look at that verse in just a little bit. But Jesus goes on to say, he who is faithful in what is the least is faithful also in much. He who is unjust in what is least is also unjust, or is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to you your trust, the true riches? This is where we get a better idea of what he means by unrighteous mammon compared to true riches. It's just, if you haven't been faithful in the earthly things, who's going to give you the true riches in heaven? This obviously is about stewardship, about taking care of the things of others. What is least in this context is our worldly goods, which is of small intrinsic value. When I say that, what I mean is it's no good to you in the overall scheme of things. This life lasts, if you're lucky, 100 years. Compared to eternity, it's nothing. So the things of this world are the least. That's the least things that we should be thinking and worrying about. what is much is the heavenly things, or the true riches. If you're not faithful in the earthly things, then you're not gonna be faithful in, you're not even looking towards the things, the heavenly things, which are the true riches. And he says, I'm going to talk about that some more, by the way, but, and if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, what belongs to another, in other words, who will give you what is your own? Well, in life on earth, nothing you have belongs to you. I don't care. Even the clothes that you're wearing right now, they don't belong to you. The car you drive that's sitting out there, that doesn't belong to you. The house you live in doesn't belong to you. Nothing belongs to you. It all belongs to God, who created everything. He put us here, gave us life on this earth, lets us use all of his stuff. We are stewards of his things. He's given it to us to use, with the idea of trying to make this world a better place, to benefit others by the things that we have, to take care of ourselves and our families, but also to benefit others in the process. And your real treasures are in heaven. That's where our real treasures lie. Jesus, we've already seen in Matthew 6, in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And so there's things on this earth that we call treasures, but that's not where our emphasis is supposed to be. Jesus says the heavenly things is what we need to be storing up for in this life. Obviously, all the physical things, nothing here on this earth is going to heaven with us. The only thing that goes to heaven with us is the things that are spiritual, helping people, the good things that we do in this life. Those things go on with us. That's what our treasures really are. And then Jesus says, no servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon being earthly money, earthly things. You can't serve both. And when I say serve, it doesn't say you can't have both. God put us on this earth and gave us all this stuff, but you can't serve both. You cannot do it. It's absolutely impossible to do it. And it's beyond human capability. We just don't have the ability to serve both God and earthly things. Jesus said, if you're not with me, you're against me. We have to choose. Am I going to serve God, or am I going to serve things? Am I going to serve the things of this life? Whatever is not used for God's glory is going down the drain. When you die, it ain't going with you. When you die, it goes down the tubes. Whoever happens to be at the bottom of that tube gets to have it, your children or whoever else it might be, but you're not taking it with you. And so we need to be making sure that we are laying up treasures that will go with us when we go. Maybe they're already there before we even get there. Jesus said, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. So it's not like store up a bunch of stuff here. Everything you do goes before you to heaven. Everything good that you do, laying up treasures in heaven. That's the whole thing about this lesson that Jesus is trying to teach these people, is you got to be wise. You got to be like this guy was, thinking about the future, not thinking about right now. I got to think about the future. What's it going to be like when I don't have in his case, I don't have the stewardship anymore. So what am I going to do? With us is what's going to happen after I don't have the stuff that I have here? What's going to happen after that? We need to be thinking about that. There's a lesson here. At the very beginning, he said this man, the reason he lost his stewardship was because he was wasteful. Well, here's just one example of wastefulness, and there's many ways that we waste things in this life. But wastefulness is not really a good look for a steward. A steward is supposed to take care of the things that has been given to him. In our case, God gives us many things. We're supposed to use them to his glory. That nice house that you live in, what good is it if you don't use it to God's glory? You're not taking it with you. When you leave, it stays here and somebody else gets it. But if you use it for God's glory, whatever things you do for God's glory go to heaven before you and are there to greet you. We are stewards of God's things. It's not ours. We're stewards of God's things, and we need to be using it for his glory. The car that you drive, it's not yours. It's not going with you when you die and leave this earth. But if you use it for God's glory, then those things go with you. And so Paul puts it this way in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He says, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And so that's what Paul is talking about. He says, I gave up all kinds of stuff. He had a high position in the Jewish religion. He was apparently was from a wealthy family. He gave all of that up so that he could follow after God, follow after Jesus. And he says, so I'm not looking at the things you can see. I'm looking at the unseen. I'm looking at heaven, where God is, where I want to be. There's one thing that I want to read. It's not from the Bible. It's from a Christian philosopher, but I thought it was a good thing that he said. It's in a book that I'm reading right now called "The Case for Faith" by Lee Strobel. Anyway, this quote I thought was worth reading. He says, you have to understand that people's character is not formed by decisions all at once, but by thousands of little choices they make every day, even not without even knowing about it. Each day we are preparing ourselves for either being with God and his people and valuing the things that he values, or choosing not to engage with those things. So just little by little, every little decision we make in this life is forming our character. And we each day are preparing ourselves, as he says, preparing ourselves for either being with God and his people or not caring about it at all. And so I just want to encourage us. Are you preparing to be with God and his people? Is that how you live your life? Every little decision you make, every little thing that you do, how am I glorifying God in this? That is what we need to do. Set our eyes on the things that are not seen so that we'll have something there when we get to heaven. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And so what I'm suggesting to every one of us here, including myself, invest in heaven. That's where we need to put everything. All of our investment should be towards heaven. It's the only thing that lasts. Yeah, sure, we invest in the stock market or invest in old cars or whatever. We can invest in all that kind of stuff for our retirement's sake here, but we're not taking any of that with us. If we're not investing in heaven, we're going to be in trouble when we go up there and stand before God. So we need to, I'm just saying, invest in heaven. That's where the good stuff is. That's where eternity is. That's where we all need to be striving for. We're going to sing a song just a second called I Surrender All. We sing it all the time. Every one of you knows this song. Do you? Do you really surrender all? We need to think about when we sing this song, make it really us. What I have is yours, God. I mean, I should be saying what you have is mine, and I realize that, and I'm giving it back to you. I'm using what you gave me for you. As we sing this, I hope you can all mean it. I hope we all can mean it. I surrender all. Keith, would you lead us in that?